Welcome back to the Piping Pastor, Theology Talks. Today we'll be entering into our much anticipated discussion of aliens and theology. Well, this afternoon I am joining you with smoking my Peterson. This is the Killarney Red, the shape, I believe they refer to this as the Bent Dublin. It's a Peterson 221. And in it, I'm smoking some Three Nuns. It seemed appropriate since we're going to be discussing perhaps a bit of fiction in addition to the Bible, that I should be smoking the tobacco of C.S. Lewis. Also, since I just wrapped up a video talking about classic men's summer fashion, I thought it may be beneficial to point out the fact that I'm wearing a polo today. We had one of my daughters had a jumping competition today, horse jumping. Well, she was on a horse jumping things. They weren't jumping over horses. It's called show jumping. In any case, it was outside all day, around a bunch of horses and so forth. She did great, did wonderful. She ribboned in 3 events. But not necessarily the kind of event you want to go to wearing long sleeves and a waistcoat and long pants and so forth. So instead, still adhering to classic men's fashions, I have the salmon colored shirt here and some Madras shorts. Madras is a pattern. Maybe I'll include a picture here. Because you don't just have to wear khaki shorts and a polo. That can get kind of boring real fast, the single color. And then if you get really loud pants that are not in a traditional style or pattern, that can be a little off-putting as well. So Madras is a great way to have a little color, have a little fun, and still, stay within the bounds of classic fashion. And it's a hot day today in Maryland as well, so I'm doing some ice water with my tobacco this afternoon. Well, aliens. Now, when I'm referring to aliens, I am referring to extraterrestrials, so intelligent life forms outside of this Earth. I'm not talking about the term aliens as it used in the Bible. That refers to those outside the nation of Israel, or when the nation of Israel is in captivity. Okay. Because despite what you may have seen, there's no reference to aliens, extraterrestrial life, in the Bible. But I'll get to that in a second. First of all, can you believe in aliens and still be a Christian and believe in God? Short answer, yes. The belief in intelligent life outside of our world, many people argue, look, how big the universe is, these galaxies, all these galaxies we can see just with our current ability to look into the universe, and all the stars in those galaxies, all the planets around those stars, just by sheer numbers, you would think, okay, there's got to be some other intelligent life out there. That's the argument that many people make. Now, probably not as prolific as Star Trek would have us believe, that every few light years there's an intelligent civilization that we can interact with, right? Because as I discussed in my theological anthropology series and also my series on creationism, the fact that we are here is incredibly rare. All the various different things that have to come together in such a perfect way in order to produce intelligent life is an incredibly rare occurrence. So even though we look at the vastness of the universe, we can look at the vastness of the universe, and we go back to our best of all possible worlds theory that we discussed in the problem of evil, and it could be that we're the only ones, right? There's that possibility too. But there's certainly nothing that prohibits you from thinking that there's alien life out there. Because again, as I said, the Bible doesn't speak about it. And the reason you can, and the reason the Bible doesn't speak about it, because in point of fact, it just doesn't have that much to do with your salvation. If God did create another world out there with another set of intelligent beings such as ourselves, then you know what? Fine. It doesn't affect my relationship with God. It doesn't affect your relationship with God. Now, the question that people often propose when we say, okay, well, let's say there is another set of intelligent life out there, we get into the whole parent argument. Does God love them better? Are they a more perfect species than we are? So on and so forth. Well, we know that we are created in God's image. The Bible says that. And I expanded upon that in a paper I wrote, and then also in one of the discussions I had, which is that all the universe is created in God's image. So God creates things to reflect who God is. The truth of God, the glory of God is reflected in all of the created order. So if God were to create another species of intelligent beings on another planet far, far away, they also be created in God's image, because God's image is not 2 arms, 2 legs, and a head, right? It's not even carbon-based life, okay? The image of God is reflected. It reflects God's glory and God's creative nature, because God creates, because God is a creator. That's what a creator does. A creator creates. So would they still be in the image of God? There's certainly an argument to make for that. Now, would they be saved in the same means? That is to say, would they be saved through the sacrifice of Christ on the cross? Again, yes, because the work of Christ on the cross is a truly sovereign act of God incarnate for all people, all time, everywhere. It doesn't matter if they're here or if they've got tentacles and they live on Alpha Centauri, right? It's a sovereign act, all time, all places, all spaces, from beginning to end. That's how God operates in a truly sovereign matter. Now, what would that look like in terms of their sacred text and their engagement with God and so on and so forth? I don't know, and neither do you. And we will not know unless we encounter said species and start having conversations with them about their religio-philosophic traditions. But I will say that God reveals God's self to all different peoples on our planet, and God may reveal God's self in different ways to different peoples. That comes out of Vatican II. There's a little back and forth discussion I had with Parsimonius Piper in a previous video as well that kind of talks a little bit about that as well. General revelation of God everywhere. Now, aliens in the Bible. My guilty pleasure is Ancient Aliens. I love that show because it's entertaining. It's produced in order to be entertaining. And I also like it because it's a good way to learn about the fallacies of poor academic arguments. They say things like, oh, could this mean that alien ships landed here? Ancient astronaut theorists say yes. Well, of course they say yes. It's their argument. I'm not going to propose an argument that I disagree with myself, right? They don't even go through the pretense of setting up a straw man to knock down. They just don't even put the straw man up. They propose their own arguments and then agree with themselves. And they intersperse the interviews with these people who, let's be honest, they have made up titles. Cryptomythologist is not a thing. Cryptobiologist is not a thing. If your study of something is something that doesn't exist, and as soon as it's discovered you cannot study it any longer, then that's not a real field of study, right? Cryptozoologist, looking after the Loch Ness Monster. If the Loch Ness Monster is found and people have an opportunity to examine it, the people examining it would be zoologists, because it would then be a known animal. It would no longer be crypto. So you can only study it as long as no one ever finds it, right? And the same thing with cryptomythology or investigative archaeologist. Again, that's a made-up title. All archaeologists investigate. That's what they do, whether they're human archaeologists or all the various different forms of archaeology. They investigate artifacts and sites to find things in the past. But you'll have these people with these made-up titles, and they'll do their little interviews about the books that they've written and so on and so forth, and then they'll pop in like real scientists, physicists from UC Berkeley who talk about wormholes, and then they flip back to one of those made-up title people who just wrote a book and travel the world and look for different, weird carvings and things like that. And it seems as if they're making a cognizant argument, but really it's Swiss cheese, right? But in those episodes where they talk about, oh no, aliens visited and people misinterpreted it, right? It was aliens visited and people just thought it was God. Well, that's the same argument that the Jesuit missionaries made when they first visited China. Qi is not a real thing. No. It's the Holy Spirit. You just misinterpreted it. You're not quite smart enough to get this, so let me explain it to you. In my way, from my lens. So what these people are doing is they're looking at these accounts in the biblical accounts in the Old Testament, and they're putting their 20th century goggles on and saying, oh, no, it wasn't angels, it was aliens. You're completely discounting the revelation of that person who wrote that thing. And you're just kind of assuming that they're not too terribly bright. You're smarter than they are, you know more than they do, so then you have a better perspective of it. And in particular, they point usually to Ezekiel 1 and the accounts of the Nephilim in Genesis 6, because in Ezekiel 1, he talks about the angels showing up, right? And the angels have 4 faces, and they're on these 4-wheeled mechanisms, these wheels that are perpendicular to each other. And then there's an entire argument about that, where that comes from and why that is, and so on and so forth. So, but we're already getting close to 11 minutes here. So I thought I could cover this in one video, but my goodness, I'm going to have to do 2 videos on theology and aliens, because there is some very interesting things there, right? There's people who look at these symbolic representations, in Ezekiel and in Genesis and the stories in Genesis and so forth, and they're like, hey, well, this looks something like this, maybe this is that. But as usual, there are contextual and historical criticisms that we can apply to the text in a really clear and honest academic fashion that explains that far better than just assuming it's an alien spacecraft. But as I said, we'll cover that in video 2. So look forward to that and having some more discussions, of course. I hope our brother out there in Switzerland at Redcoat's Return gets a chance to see this, and I may even get into a discussion of the TARDIS in video 2, your little smoking shed. So in any case, I'm going to return my attention to my 3 nuns tobacco. Have a lovely week, and as always, happy reading.